Chapter 31. The Minstrel Show. It is odd what some people find funny. Case in point, a strange moment of levity in the midst of a grueling murder trial. On the second day of testimony, 11-year-old Sadie Morini was called to the witness stand. As the child timidly made her way through the court, a skittish rabbit among the foxes, something truly unexpected happened. The wire suspending a length of stovepipe broke and a heating duct suddenly crashed down on the heads of those assembled. Amidst all the noise, shock, and commotion, thankfully no one was injured. The correspondent from the Daily Echo, one from the small phalanx of bored reporters still in attendance when Power was not on the stand, knew he had seen something he could use. Ever vigilant for an opportunity to impugn the accused, the Echo man made hay of the unfortunate mishap. Several links came within a few inches of Wheeler's head and he laughed heartily. The paper spun the prisoner's mirth as manic and wildly inappropriate to the moment, implying that Wheeler was so unbalanced as to find the potential for injury to self or others humorous. Such rhetoric played well with readers, by then conditioned to think the worst of Wheeler. The Morning Chronicle reprinted the incident verbatim the next day, perpetuating the myth of Wheeler's crazed indifference to his own future as well as the safety of others. Reality is in the eye of the beholder. Mr. Robert Payne, the only remaining pro-Wheeler journalist, saw things differently. According to his report in the St. John Daily Sun, Wheeler was not amused by the unscripted near-death experience, rather, his laughter was in response to a muttered comment by the bailiff, who quipped you had a narrow escape. In Payne's tale of the tape, the incident showed Wheeler to be common in good humor, even in the face of sudden calamity. The prisoner had an entirely different take on the accident. It was not the danger or even the bailiff's jape that tickled Wheeler but simply a sight gag. As the heating duct fell, the pipe released a tidal wave of soot that settled on many in the court, including the prosecutors. Seeing his opponents suddenly decked out in blackface, Wheeler joked something along the lines that the courtroom had become a real minstrel show. For the dark-skinned Wheeler, long the target of racial slurs, it was a fitting allegory and he laughed heartily at the sad irony of it all. Although the incident proved minor in the grand scheme of things, it showcased how history is skewed by the perceptions of those who claim to faithfully record it. The Echo turned a benign event into further proof of Wheeler's callous nature using nothing more than jaundiced editing and a practiced eye for its readers' baser instincts. Mr. Payne, in sharp contrast, saw it as proof positive of Wheeler's noble bearing and remarkable strength of character. Wheeler himself couched the experience in the embittered yet resilient light of an oppressed minority. Stripped of all bents and biases, the pipe pratfall came as journalistic manna from heaven. In a trial mired by testimony regurgitated for the fourth time, the near miss was sorely needed comic relief for an audience all too acquainted with the intricacies of the evidence. By this stage of the game, the trial was no longer about evidence or testimony or even Power's feints at science. It had become a referendum on Wheeler's behavior, countenance, and demeanor. One keen-eyed reporter or another managed to infuse his every gesture or utterance with sinister meaning, no matter what Peter said or did. The blackface simply exposed the spectacle for what it really was, theater. The trial was a mere formality, the verdict a foregone conclusion. Wheeler's hearing had become, quite literally, a circus, a minstrel show to placate and entertain the masses. It is telling what some people find funny. The courtroom lends itself well to dramatization. As Kentville's latest minstrel show revealed, the justice system is pure theater. What greater spectacle exists than polemic adversaries debating matters of life and death? If done correctly, jurisprudence can be a poetic and stirring statement of our values as a nation. It can also be rip-roaring entertainment, lofty ideals reduced to a bar brawl between two diametrically opposed thugs, duking it out to the death. Sadly, the law can become an exercise in stupidity, a masterclass in apathy, indolence, and false bravado. Lawyers often squander their opportunities, opting for flaccid rhetoric and half-baked arguments hidden beneath a barrage of bellicose thundering and wild gesticulation. Flashed triumphs over substance as barristers place greater emphasis on a soliloquy's delivery than its content. So it was with the closing arguments in the matter of Queen v. Wheeler. As Dr. Jacques and the last remaining witnesses stepped clear of the dock and all remnants of the stovepipe soot were wiped away, the case of Peter Wheeler, once touted as the trial of the century, faltered towards the finish line having never found its stride. The only new evidence on offer was Power, who never quite delivered on his pre-trial hype, and Dr. Jacques' blood analysis, which played better in the press than it did in the actual courtroom. Perhaps the most surprising turn of events came from Henry Dwight Ruggles. As the Crown rested its case, the defense counsel shocked the crowd when he announced he would call no witnesses. By refusing to counter the prosecution's case, The defense was ostensibly saying they were certain the Crown had not met its burden of proof. It was a time-honored but risky gambit and one Wheeler could ill afford. While innocent until proven guilty was a beloved axiom in the justice system, the credo failed to take into account those cases in which the jury was predisposed to find the defendant guilty before the trial had even begun. Ruggles's Hail Mary ploy struck a select few as bold advocacy. The majority opinion, however, held that the team was simply outmatched, saddled with an obviously guilty client for whom no reasonable defense could be mounted. Although he abdicated his right to present evidence on Wheeler's behalf, Ruggles wanted one last kick at the can. Townsend called counsel before the bench, where Ruggles argued that the defense was entitled to address the jury last during closing arguments. The Crown took exception as Harrington also wanted the final word. More time, effort, and energy went into the protracted discussion of which side would claim the closing summation than was expended on what either team intended to say. After listening to both sides squabble for far too long, Judge Townsend had heard enough. The matter was decided by a technicality. Because Harrington was simply an appointee of the court and was not a Crown prosecutor, Townsend ruled that the prosecution must deliver their summation first, thereby giving the coveted closing slot to the defense. Neither summation would live on in judicial infamy, but shame fell hardest on the prosecution. Lulled into a false sense of confidence by a trial that was always theirs to lose, the prosecution's summation barely rose to the level of trite. Harrington asked the jury a single question: if not Wheeler, then who? It was an age-old chestnut of jurisprudence, hackneyed to the point of parody, but one easily disguised as down-home common sense. It was the quintessential lazy argument, a cut rhetorical sleight of hand so worn at the heel it fooled only children and imbeciles. As is always the case when such devices are invoked, it was the right question posed at the wrong time to the wrong people. It did not fall to the jurors to identify alternative suspects. That task rested squarely on the ample spotlit shoulders of Detective Nick Power. Furthermore, absence of evidence is never evidence of absence. That no other suspects were named was not proof that they did not exist. The void meant only that Power had not done an effective or thorough job. Unfortunately, this legal nuance was lost on the jury, and for reasons of strategy or perhaps incompetence, Ruggles never pointed it out for their benefit. Prosecutor Harrington, moving with the slow deliberate stride and unflinching gaze of a caged animal, paced before the jury box as if exhorting its occupants to defy him. He reminded jurors it all came down to a question of motive. What would a stranger want to enter a house at night and kill an innocent girl for? He queried, as if the answer to that question were any different than the reasons he had ascribed to Wheeler. The motive, the ravaging of a defenseless young girl, held whether the assailant were the accused or a random psychopath. It was a poor man's shell game, seemingly based on the process of elimination but in fact predicated on the jury's insecurities and desire for vengeance. Jurors were only presented with a false choice between two arbitrary options, Wheeler or some faceless predator. The real alternative, that Wheeler was innocent, remained clumsily hidden. Eager to mete out justice for Annie and unable to pull another name out of the hat, the jurors turned to Wheeler. Shamed by their own shortcomings, the panel was propelled not by evidence but by a misplaced sense of civic duty and a lack of options. The cheapest of tricks, it was and remains one of the most effective. It was a devastating semantic ruse. The real question for the jury should have been, did Peter Wheeler kill Annie Kempton? If the answer was yes beyond all reasonable doubt, that was a fair and reasonable verdict. If the verdict was no, the onus was never on the jury to find the real killer.